My name is Daniel Carson, and until 2 years ago, I believed I was living the American dream in a leafy suburb just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm now 42 years old, but our story begins when I was 39 and had spent 15 years constructing what I foolishly thought was an unshakable foundation for my life and marriage that I work as a senior software developer for MedTech Solutions, one of the leading healthcare technology companies in the Northeast. It's not the kind of job that makes headlines or earns recognition outside of industry circles, but it provided financial stability and intellectual challenges that kept me satisfied. My specialty was developing secure patient data systems. Ironic, considering how blind I was to the security breaches happening in my own home. The position paid well enough for us to afford our colonial-style house on Maple Avenue, a beautiful four-bedroom place with dark hardwood floors, crown molding, and a backyard that backed up to a protected woodland area. We'd purchased it 7 years ago, and Rebecca had spent countless hours transforming it from a decent house into what she called our forever home. The neighborhood was filled with young professionals and families, with excellent schools and low crime rates. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, though perhaps they shouldn't. Rebecca and I met during our sophomore year at Northeastern University. I was studying computer science and working part-time at the campus IT help desk. She was a marketing major with a minor in communications, always surrounded by a circle of friends and admirers. Even now, it's hard to describe Rebecca without acknowledging her magnetism. She stands 5'7" with naturally wavy auburn hair that catches the light in ways that seem impossible, bright green eyes that crinkle at the corners when she laughs genuinely, and the kind of smile that advertising executives would kill to feature in campaigns. The first time I saw her was in the university library. She was trying to recover a corrupted file on her laptop, growing increasingly frustrated, her cheeks flushed with anger. I offered to help, partly because it was my job and partly because I couldn't resist the opportunity to talk to her. What should have been a 15-minute data recovery turned into a 3-hour conversation that spilled over into coffee and then dinner. By the end of the night, I was completely captivated. We were opposites in many ways. She was outgoing, spontaneous, and socially adept, while I was reserved, methodical, and more comfortable with code than with crowds. But we seemed to balance each other. She drew me out of my shell, and I provided a stable center to her whirlwind personality. At least, that's what I thought. After graduation, we moved to Massachusetts to pursue our careers. I landed my position at MedTech, and she secured an entry-level role at Apex Public Relations, one of Boston's most respected PR firms. 2 years later, we were married in a moderately lavish ceremony at the Oceanside Resort in Cape Cod, surrounded by 150 of our closest friends and family. Her parents, both successful attorneys from Connecticut, spared no expense. My more modest family from Western Pennsylvania looked slightly out of place, but were genuinely happy for us. Our early married years were good, or perhaps I was simply too blinded by love and career ambition to notice any cracks forming. We traveled when we could, taking vacations to Cabo San Lucas, the Bahamas, and a memorable 2-week tour of Italy for our 5th anniversary. Rebecca decorated our home with impeccable taste, mixing modern elements with traditional New England style. She hosted dinner parties where I'd watch her charm our friends and my colleagues with seemingly effortless grace. We had discussed having children, but jointly decided to focus on our careers first. There's plenty of time for kids later, she'd say. Let's enjoy our freedom while we have it. I agreed, partly because I was putting in long hours trying to advance at MedTech, and partly because I wanted to be financially secure before taking on the responsibility of parenthood. Rebecca thrived in her PR role. Her natural charisma and sharp instincts for crafting narratives propelled her through the ranks faster than most of her peers. 2 years ago, she was promoted to senior account manager, which meant more responsibility, higher pay, and longer hours. It also meant working closely with Jason Whitfield, the firm's newest partner who had transferred from their New York office. Jason was everything I wasn't: tall, conventionally handsome in that corporate catalog way, with perfectly styled dark hair that never seemed to move out of place. He played squash 3 times a week, had completed 2 marathons, and apparently had an encyclopedic knowledge of fine wines. Whenever Rebecca mentioned him, which became increasingly frequent, her eyes would light up with something I misinterpreted as professional admiration. Jason thinks we should approach the Hendricks campaign differently, she'd say over dinner. Or, Jason's connections in New York have really opened doors for the firm. The admiration in her voice was palpable, but I dismissed any feelings of unease. After all, I trusted my wife completely. They say hindsight is 20/20, and looking back now, the warning signs were flashing like emergency beacons for months before I consciously acknowledged them. The shift was subtle at first, so gradual that each individual change could be rationalized away, especially when you're operating under the assumption that your spouse would never betray you. The late nights at the office started around March. Initially, it was once or twice a week, with Rebecca texting me that she needed to finish some urgent work for a client presentation. The Whitfield account is demanding, she'd explain when she finally came home, smelling of wine and wearing a tired but somehow energized expression. Jason needs the whole team pulling extra hours to make sure we land this contract. By April, these late nights had become the norm rather than the exception. She'd come home after I'd already eaten dinner alone, sometimes after 10 p.m., offering apologetic smiles and quick kisses that tasted of mint as if she'd just freshened her breath. When I suggested joining her for dinner near her office on these late nights, there was always a reason why it wouldn't work. We're ordering in and working through dinner. Or, it's such a mess at the office right now. You wouldn't want to see me like this. Then came the wardrobe changes. Rebecca had always dressed well, but suddenly she was investing in new outfits at a pace that seemed excessive even for her fashion-conscious standards. Sleeker dresses, higher heels, and lingerie that I never saw her wear. When I complimented a new blouse or dress, she'd casually mention that the firm expects a certain image, or that Jason says presentation is half the battle in winning clients. Jason this, Jason that. His name began appearing in every other sentence. Jason thinks. Jason says. Jason and I were discussing. He had apparently become the sun around which her professional universe revolved. In May, Rebecca changed the password on her phone. For the entirety of our marriage, we'd known each other's passwords, not because we snooped, but because we had nothing to hide. When I needed to use her phone one evening while mine was charging, I found myself locked out. Oh, IT at work made us all change our passwords for security compliance, she explained with a dismissive wave. Company policy, all devices, personal or otherwise. It sounded plausible, especially given my own work in data security, so I didn't push the issue. The weekend trips for team-building retreats started in early summer. Once a month, she'd pack an overnight bag for what she described as intensive strategy sessions at conference centers or hotels within driving distance of Boston. She'd come home from these retreats exhausted but somehow energized, with anecdotes about team activities that always seemed to involve Jason's leadership prowess or clever business insights. Even our intimate life changed. Sometimes weeks would pass without physical connection, with Rebecca citing exhaustion from work. Then there were nights when she'd initiate sex with an intensity that felt somehow different, as if she was performing rather than connecting. I told myself she was just stressed from work, that the pressures of her new position were affecting her in ways I didn't fully understand. The first concrete suspicion I couldn't rationalize away came on a Tuesday evening in late July. Rebecca was taking a shower, and her phone, left on the kitchen counter, lit up with a text notification. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the preview was visible on the lock screen. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for next time. From Jason W. My stomach dropped, but I still tried to explain it away. Maybe they'd pulled off a successful presentation for a client. Perhaps they'd landed a big account. I almost convinced myself it was innocent, but then I started noticing other things I'd overlooked. The way she angled her phone screen away from me when texting, how she would step outside to take certain calls, claiming the reception was better on the porch, and the subtle but distinctive cologne scent that sometimes clung to her clothes when she returned home late. Still, I hesitated to confront her. 15 years together had built a foundation of trust that couldn't be shaken by circumstantial evidence, no matter how unsettling. I needed to be sure before raising accusations that could damage our marriage. So I watched and I waited, all while feeling the ground shifting beneath my feet. The definitive confirmation of Rebecca's infidelity came on September 12th, a date etched into my memory with the permanence of a scar. I had been in Chicago for a 3-day technology conference, representing MedTech Solutions at a panel on Healthcare data security. The final day's sessions had been canceled due to a scheduling conflict with the venue, meaning I could catch an earlier flight home that I decided not to tell Rebecca about my early return. Not because I was suspicious or planning to catch her in anything, but simply because I thought it would be nice to surprise her. Perhaps we could go out for dinner at that Italian place in the north and she loved so much. We hadn't had a proper date night in months. My flight landed at Logan at 2:30 p.m. I took an Uber directly home, stopping only to pick up a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flowers, from the florist near our neighborhood. The September afternoon was perfect. Crisp air, golden sunlight filtering through trees, just beginning to hint at autumn colors. I remember feeling optimistic as the Uber pulled up to our house, thinking that perhaps this unexpected free evening could help us reconnect. I noticed Rebecca's car in the driveway, which wasn't surprising since she occasionally worked from home on Thursdays. What was surprising was the unfamiliar black Audi parked behind it. For a moment, I thought she might be meeting with a client at the house, though that had never happened before. I used my key to enter quietly, thinking I'd still surprise her with the flowers. The house seemed unusually still, but then I heard Rebecca's laughter floating down from upstairs. Not the polite, professional laugh she used at work functions, but her real laugh, uninhibited and musical. The kind I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Then a man's voice, too low to make out the words, followed by more laughter from Rebecca. I stood frozen in the entryway, flowers hanging limply from my hand as the reality of what was happening crystallized with brutal clarity. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk out, and pretend I'd never come home early. Another part, the part that won out, needed to see the truth with my own eyes, no matter how painful. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like I was moving through molasses. Our bedroom door was partially open, and through the gap, I could see clothing scattered across the floor. A man's tie, Rebecca's blouse, a pair of tailored slacks, definitely not mine. When I pushed the door fully open, the scene that greeted me was exactly what I had feared, yet somehow still shocking. Enough to feel like a physical blow. Rebecca and Jason, in our bed. The bed I had helped her select when we first moved into this house. The bed where we had shared thousands of nights together. Time seemed to stretch and distort in that moment. I remember odd details with perfect clarity. How the afternoon light cast patterns through the blinds across their tangled bodies. The expression of shock that transformed Rebecca's flushed face when she saw me. The way Jason scrambled backward like a crab, reaching for the sheet to cover himself. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound was our collective breathing and the muffled ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. A wedding gift from my parents. "Daniel," Rebecca finally said, her voice unnaturally high. "You're supposed to be in Chicago." As if my geographical error was the problem here. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, flat and calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. She didn't pretend not to understand what I was asking. Her eyes dropped to the rumpled sheets. 6 months, she answered quietly. 6 months. While I was renovating our kitchen because she'd wanted new countertops. While I was planning a surprise weekend in Vermont for her birthday. While I was attending marriage counseling sessions alone because she was too busy with work but had promised to join later. Jason had managed to gather some of his clothing and was pulling on his pants, his face a mask of embarrassment rather than shame. He didn't meet my eyes. "I should go," he muttered. "Yes, you should," I replied, stepping aside from the doorway. Part of me wanted to physically confront him, to channel all my hurt and anger into something violent and satisfying. But what would that accomplish beyond giving him the upper hand in whatever came next? So I watched in silent contempt as he finished dressing and hurried past me, not even fully buttoning his shirt before fleeing down the stairs. When the front door closed behind him, I turned back to Rebecca. She had put on a robe and was sitting on the edge of the bed, her body language a strange mixture of defiance and defeat. "Are you going to say anything?" she finally asked. "What is there to say? I think the situation speaks for itself." I set the now crushed bouquet of lilies on the dresser. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. We can discuss next steps tomorrow, when I'm less likely to say things we'll both regret." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "It wasn't planned, Daniel. It just happened." The absurdity of that statement broke through my shock. "Things like this don't just happen, Rebecca. 6 months of deception requires planning, coordination, and a whole lot of lies. She had no response to that. The next week passed in a fog of pain, anger, and logistical discussions about temporary living arrangements. Rebecca suggested she could stay with a friend while we figured things out, a proposal I accepted. I needed space in our home to think clearly without the constant reminder of her betrayal. But that wasn't even the worst part. The true depth of her betrayal revealed itself a week after I discovered the affair. While using our shared laptop to look for an old tax document, I found a folder buried within her personal files. Curiosity and lingering suspicion led me to open it, and what I discovered made the affair seem almost trivial by comparison. The folder contained meticulously prepared legal documents, the groundwork for a divorce filing that would have blindsided me completely. But what turned my blood cold were the fabricated financial records suggesting I had been embezzling funds from MedTech Solutions and transferring them to offshore accounts. There were falsified bank statements, doctored emails, and even a manufactured paper trail suggesting I had been stealing proprietary code to sell to competitors. The level of detail was shocking. She or someone she'd hired had gone to extraordinary lengths to create evidence that could not only destroy my marriage, but potentially lead to criminal charges and the complete ruination of my career and reputation. Notes in Rebecca's handwriting outlined a strategy: file for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct, provide the fabricated evidence to both the court and my employer, and walk away with the house, most of our assets, and possibly even ongoing support payments. One note specifically mentioned using the shock factor to pressure me into a quick settlement rather than risk criminal prosecution. The betrayal of the affair paled in comparison to this calculated plan to destroy my life. The woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been actively plotting my destruction to benefit herself and, presumably, her new relationship with Jason. That night, as I sat alone in our house surrounded by framed photos of happier times that now seemed like elaborate fiction, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her immediately about what I'd found. That would only give her time to cover her tracks or accelerate her plans. Instead, I would build my own case, gather my own evidence, and ensure that when the dust settled, justice, not vengeance, would prevail. The discovery of Rebecca's planned betrayal fundamentally changed something in me. The initial shock and heartbreak were still there, but they were now compounded by a cold, calculated anger that I channeled into methodical preparation. This wasn't about emotional vengeance. It was about protecting myself and ensuring that those who had conspired to destroy me faced appropriate consequences. My first step was securing professional assistance. The day after discovering the fabricated evidence, I contacted Martin Schaefer, reputed to be one of the best divorce attorneys in Massachusetts. His services weren't cheap. His initial consultation fee alone was $500, but I knew I needed someone with both experience and ruthlessness to counter whatever legal team Rebecca would assemble. This is one of the most premeditated attempts at character assassination and financial fraud I've seen in 20 years of practice, Martin said after reviewing the documents I'd found. The good news is that we caught it before she filed. Now we have the element of surprise on our side. Under Martin's guidance, I began meticulously documenting everything. I created secure backups of the fabricated evidence Rebecca had prepared, storing copies both digitally in encrypted files and physically in a safe deposit box Martin helped me open at a bank Rebecca didn't use. I gathered our legitimate financial records going back 10 years, documenting every major purchase, investment, and contribution to our shared assets. Meanwhile, I maintained the appearance of a husband processing his wife's infidelity, but potentially open to reconciliation. When Rebecca called to check in after a few days at her friend's place, I responded with just the right mixture of hurt and lingering affection. "I'm still trying to process everything," I told her. "I think we should consider counseling before making any permanent decisions." She agreed readily. Too readily, I now realized. She needed time to execute her plan, and marriage counseling would buy her that time, while making her appear committed to saving our relationship should things later go to court. We began weekly sessions with Dr. Melanie Harper, a marriage counselor with an office in downtown Boston. I participated authentically, sharing genuine feelings about the pain of her betrayal while carefully avoiding any mention that I knew about her deeper plot. Rebecca played her role well, tearfully confessing to the affair but framing it as a mistake, resulting from feeling disconnected in our marriage. I got caught up in the excitement and attention, she explained during our second session, dabbing at carefully controlled tears. Jason made me feel valued in ways I hadn't in a long time. But I know now what a terrible mistake it was. Dr. Harper nodded sympathetically. Daniel, how do you feel hearing Rebecca take responsibility like this? I appreciate her honesty. I replied, the irony of the statement not lost on me. I think rebuilding trust will be the hardest part, but I'm willing to try if she is. The performance satisfied both Rebecca and Dr. Harper, neither suspecting that I was buying time just as surely as Rebecca was. Outside of counseling, I implemented several key protective measures. First, I transferred my personal savings, money I had inherited from my grandmother and had always kept separate from our joint accounts, to a new account at a different bank. This gave me approximately $42,000 that Rebecca couldn't access or even know about. I installed a comprehensive security system in our home, including cameras in common areas. I've been feeling unsafe since everything happened, I explained when Rebecca questioned the installation during one of her visits to collect more clothing. Just for peace of mind. She accepted this explanation, never suspecting that the real purpose was to document her comings and goings, and more importantly, who might be coming and going with her. The cameras proved invaluable. During the 3 weeks Rebecca was supposedly staying at her friend Melissa's apartment, the security footage captured her bringing Jason to our house 4 times when she thought I was at work. On 2 occasions, they accessed my home office, spending considerable time going through papers in my desk and photographing documents that I had my personal and work laptops checked for spyware by a security specialist and found keyloggers installed. On both, programs that would record everything I typed, including passwords. This discovery led me to change all my passwords and create a deliberate digital trail of innocuous activities while conducting my real business on a new, secure laptop. Perhaps most importantly, I began documenting the affair itself. I recovered deleted texts from our cellular account, showing hundreds of messages between Rebecca and Jason going back over 8 months, longer than the 6 months she had admitted to. I cataloged their patterns, the fabricated late nights at work, the suspicious weekend trips, the hotel charges on her personal credit card that didn't match any legitimate business purpose. When possible, I recorded conversations, Massachusetts. Being a 2-party consent state made this challenging, but there were occasions when Rebecca would call me while I was in New Hampshire or Connecticut on business, states with different recording laws. During these conversations, she would sometimes inadvertently reveal details about her ongoing relationship with Jason while ostensibly discussing our reconciliation efforts. The most damning evidence came from Rebecca's own carelessness. One evening, when she had returned to the house to collect more belongings, she left her laptop briefly unattended while taking a shower. I used the opportunity to clone her hard drive, a technique I'd learned from a digital forensics expert Martin had recommended. This yielded a treasure trove of information, including emails between her and Jason discussing their relationship, their plans for the future, and most critically, explicit discussions about framing me for financial misconduct. Once the embezzlement evidence comes to light, he'll be too busy defending himself against criminal charges to fight the divorce terms, Rebecca had written in one email. My attorney says his reputation will be so damaged that the judge will likely grant me everything I ask for. Jason's response had been equally calculating. Just make sure the documentation is solid. We don't want this backfiring. Once it's done, we can finally stop sneaking around. For 3 months, I lived a double life. Outwardly the hurt but hopeful husband working on his marriage, while privately building an airtight case not just against Rebecca's infidelity, but against her conspiracy to destroy me. I updated Martin weekly, and he assembled a team that included a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and a digital evidence specialist. You're doing all the right things, Martin assured me during one of our meetings. When the time comes to move forward, we'll be holding all the cards. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. Sitting across from Rebecca at counseling sessions, listening to her fabricated remorse. Meeting her for occasional date nights as part of our supposed reconciliation, watching her check her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, knowing she was probably communicating with Jason. Each interaction required a level of acting I never knew I was capable of. But with each piece of evidence I gathered, with each layer of protection I put in place, I felt more in control of a situation that had initially left me shattered. This wasn't about getting even. It was about justice, self-preservation, and ensuring that the elaborate trap Rebecca and Jason had set would ultimately ensnare its creators instead of its intended victim. The implementation of social consequences began in November, approximately 4 months after discovering the affair and 3 months after uncovering the plot against me. By this point, my legal preparation was solid, but Martin had advised me that courts often consider more than just legal facts. They consider context, character, and community standing. If Rebecca maintained her sterling social reputation while mine was tarnished by her fabricated accusations, it could still influence the outcome regardless of the evidence we had gathered. The court of public opinion matters, Martin explained during one of our strategy sessions. Not legally, perhaps, but judges are human. They can be subtly influenced by how the parties are perceived in their community. I understood his point, but was adamant about one thing. I won't spread rumors or lies. Whatever happens needs to be based entirely on truth. Martin nodded approvingly. Sometimes the truth, strategically revealed, is more devastating than any fabrication could be. With that principle in mind, I began what would become the systematic dismantling of Rebecca and Jason's social standing. Not through vindictive gossip, but through carefully orchestrated revelations of their own actions. The first step was contacting Elaine Whitfield, Jason's wife of 12 years. Finding her wasn't difficult. A simple social media search revealed that she worked as an art curator at a downtown gallery. Arranging a meeting was trickier, but I eventually sent her a brief, non-specific email saying I had important information regarding her husband that she should be aware of. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Cambridge, far from both our social circles. Elaine was an elegant woman with a composed demeanor that suggested emotional resilience, something she would need for our conversation. I had brought a small selection of evidence, printouts of text exchanges between Jason and Rebecca, photos from our home security system showing them entering our house together, and a particularly damning email where Jason discussed how he and Rebecca would build their new life once both their divorces were finalized. I debated whether to show you these, I told her, sliding the folder across the table. But ultimately, I felt you deserved to know the truth, just as I would have wanted to know. Elaine reviewed the materials silently, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to a contained anger that reminded me of my own response months earlier. I've suspected something, she finally said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. There have been signs, but seeing it so clearly documented. She looked up at me. Thank you for coming to me directly instead of turning this into gossip. I know that took courage. We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing timelines and filling in gaps in each other's understanding of the affair. Elaine revealed that Jason had been acting secretive for months, with unexplained expenses and late nights that matched perfectly with Rebecca's patterns. By the end of our conversation, we had both gained clarity and, unexpectedly, a sense of solidarity in our parallel experiences of betrayal. What will you do now? I asked as we prepared to leave. First, I'll be consulting my own attorney, she replied with quiet determination. Beyond that, I believe in transparency. Our friends, Jason's colleagues, they should know who they're really dealing with. True to her word, Elaine acted with remarkable efficiency. Within a week, the affair had become common knowledge at Apex Public Relations. Elaine had approached several of Jason's colleagues directly, showing them the same evidence I had provided her. She wasn't hysterical or vindictive. Her art world professionalism served her well as she methodically informed key individuals at the firm about their newest partner's lack of ethical boundaries. The impact was immediate. Rebecca came home from work one evening visibly shaken, pouring herself a generous glass of wine before confronting me. "Did you tell Jason's wife about us?" she demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled fury that I met her gaze steadily. Yes, she deserved to know the truth, just as I did. Do you have any idea what you've done? My professional reputation is being damaged because of your jealousy. Your professional reputation is being damaged because of your actions, I corrected her calmly. The truth was going to come out eventually. I simply chose not to participate in the deception any longer. her face flushed with anger, but beneath it, I could see the first flickers of fear. The carefully constructed narrative she had built was beginning to crumble. The workplace revelations were just the beginning. The second phase involved contacting Apex PR's ethics board with evidence that went beyond the personal betrayal. Through my digital forensics work, I had discovered emails where Rebecca and Jason discussed giving preferential treatment to clients who could provide them with personal benefits, including a weekend at a client's vacation property in the Berkshires, and VIP concert tickets that should have been used for client entertainment but were instead used for their romantic rendezvous. I sent this information anonymously to the firm's ethics committee, along with documentation showing that they had billed hours to clients during times when our home security footage showed them at my house. I was careful to focus solely on professional misconduct that could be verified independently, avoiding any appearance of a personal vendetta. The internal investigation was swift and thorough. Within 10 days, both Rebecca and Jason were placed on administrative leave pending the committee's findings. Their company emails were suspended, their client accounts temporarily reassigned to other team members, and their access to the firm's offices restricted. Rebecca was devastated. Her identity had been so intertwined with her professional success that this public humiliation struck at the core of her self-image. "They can't do this to me," she kept saying, pacing our living room during one of her increasingly rare visits home. "I've given that firm 8 years of my life. I've brought in more accounts than anyone in my department. Perhaps you should have considered the potential consequences before mixing your personal and professional lives so carelessly," I suggested, maintaining the calm demeanor that I knew unsettled her more than any emotional outburst would have. While the professional dominoes were falling, I was also addressing our social circle, not through mass announcements or social media declarations, but through honest, individual conversations when friends inevitably asked why Rebecca and I were having problems. When our friends Tom and Sarah invited me to dinner, clearly hoping to understand why Rebecca and I hadn't been seen together in months, I didn't shy away from the truth. "Rebecca has been having an affair with her colleague Jason for over 8 months, I told them simply. "She's currently staying elsewhere while we figure out next steps." The news spread naturally through our social network. I never had to announce it broadly because the truth, once released into our community, propagated itself. What made it particularly devastating for Rebecca was that I never embellished or editorialized. I simply stated the facts, which made my account unassailable. Rebecca's carefully cultivated social image, the successful career woman with the perfect marriage, crumbled as friends and acquaintances processed this new information. Invitations to events dried up. Text messages went unanswered. The social capital she had invested years in building was suddenly worthless. This social isolation hit Rebecca harder than I had anticipated. She had always derived energy and validation from being the center of attention, from hosting gatherings where she could showcase our home, her cooking skills, her wit. Now, those opportunities had vanished. "Everyone's taking your side," she accused during one of our increasingly tense phone calls. "You've turned them all against me." "I haven't turned anyone against you," I replied truthfully. "I've simply been honest about what happened. People are making their own judgments." The most significant social blow came when her close friend, Melissa, the one she had supposedly been staying with during our separation, learned the full truth about Rebecca's plans to frame me. Melissa worked in financial compliance and was horrified by the attempted fraud. She called me directly, apologizing for her unwitting role in the deception and making it clear she could no longer support Rebecca. "I thought she was just dealing with an affair gone wrong," Melissa told me. "I had no idea she was planning to destroy your career with false accusations. That crosses a line I can't defend." With Melissa's departure, Rebecca lost her last significant ally in our social circle. The isolation was complete. Jason's social life had collapsed even more dramatically. Elaine had made sure their country club membership committee knew exactly why she was filing for divorce. His tennis partners suddenly found their schedules too full to accommodate him. Dinner invitations ceased. His children from his first marriage, now in college, were refusing his calls after Elaine shared selected evidence of his betrayal with them. By January, both Rebecca and Jason were experiencing the natural consequences of their actions. Neither had been formally fired yet, but their professional reputations were in tatters. Their affair, now conducted without the thrill of secrecy and against the backdrop of mutual career implosion, was showing obvious strain that I learned from Elaine, with whom I maintained occasional contact, that Jason had moved into a studio apartment across town, a far cry from the luxury home he had shared with her. According to her divorce attorney, he was already struggling with legal fees and the preliminary financial disclosures required for their divorce proceedings. Rebecca, meanwhile, had been forced to rent a small one-bedroom apartment after Melissa asked her to leave. She was drawing from her personal savings to maintain appearances, but without her income, her resources were quickly dwindling. All of this occurred without a single lie on my part, without a single act of malice or direct retribution. I had simply removed the veil of secrecy and allowed the natural social order to reassert itself. People who betray their spouses, attempt to destroy innocent parties, and violate professional ethics don't tend to remain popular in their communities. As Martin had predicted, the court of public opinion had rendered its verdict long before we would ever see the inside of an actual courtroom. And that verdict was decidedly not in Rebecca and Jason's favor. By early February, the groundwork had been thoroughly laid for the legal phase of my response. Rebecca's social and professional standing had been severely compromised, not through any campaign of slander, but simply through the revelation of her own actions. The fabricated evidence she had prepared against me had been thoroughly neutralized, with my legal team having documented its fraudulent nature. Most importantly, I had maintained a posture of dignified restraint throughout, never giving her ammunition to paint me as vindictive or unstable. The timing for filing divorce papers was strategic. Martin advised waiting until Rebecca's administrative leave investigation concluded, reasoning that the official findings would strengthen our position. That moment came on February 12th, when Apex PR's Ethics Committee released their confidential determination. Both Rebecca and Jason were terminated for violations of the firm's code of conduct, conflicts of interest, and misappropriation of company resources. Rebecca received the news via certified mail, and I knew about it because she called me in a state of barely controlled hysteria. "They fired me," she said, her voice breaking. 8 years with the company, and they just discarded me. How am I supposed to pay my rent? How am I supposed to find another position in this industry after this? For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Then I remembered the meticulously falsified evidence she had prepared, designed to send me to prison while she claimed our joint assets. My sympathy evaporated. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied neutrally. "I'm sure you'll figure something out." The next morning, as Rebecca was still processing the destruction of her career, Martin's associate delivered the divorce papers to her apartment. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and adultery, included copies of text messages and emails documenting her affair, and requested an equitable division of assets based on contribution and conduct during the marriage. What the petition did not include was any mention of her plot to frame me for embezzlement. That information was held in reserve, ready to be introduced if she contested the divorce terms or attempted to proceed with her original plan. That Rebecca's response came 3 days later in the form of a tearful phone call. "Daniel, can we please discuss this before the lawyers take over? I think we could work out something fair between ourselves." Her sudden interest in fairness was as transparent as it was desperate. Without a job, with her social support network in tatters, and with Jason increasingly distant, as I'd heard through Elaine, Rebecca was finally realizing the precariousness of her position. "I think we're well beyond private negotiations," I replied. "My attorney will be handling all communication going forward." "Your attorney?" Her voice rose with indignation. "Martin Schaefer? Do you have any idea what his hourly rate is? You're just wasting our joint assets on legal fees out of spite." "I'm investing in proper legal representation to protect my interests," I corrected her. "Given recent events, I think that's prudent." What I didn't tell her was that Martin had agreed to a modified fee structure based on his interest in the unusual nature of the case. The attempted framing for embezzlement had sparked his professional curiosity and outrage in equal measure. Rebecca hired Gerald Meyer, a divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics and high-profile cases. Her choice confirmed my suspicion that, despite her financial constraints, she still intended to fight for the maximum possible settlement. Perhaps Jason was helping fund her legal battle, Or perhaps she was drawing from hidden resources I hadn't yet uncovered. Either way, her selection of counsel made it clear that reconciliation was the furthest thing from her mind. The initial filing was followed by a mandatory financial disclosure period, during which both parties were required to provide comprehensive documentation of assets, debts, income, and expenses. This was where my months of preparation proved invaluable. My disclosures were immaculate, with every account, investment, and significant purchase thoroughly documented and explained. That Rebecca's disclosures, by contrast, raised immediate red flags. She had forgotten to include a personal investment account containing approximately $45,000, omitted recent cash withdrawals totaling over $30,000 from our joint accounts, and failed to disclose a small inheritance from her uncle that she had received 2 years prior. These omissions, while relatively minor in the grand scheme of our marital assets, established a pattern of dishonesty that would undermine her credibility throughout the proceedings. Martin immediately filed a motion compelling complete financial disclosure, attaching bank records proving the existence of the undisclosed assets. The judge granted the motion and issued a stern warning about the consequences of financial concealment during divorce proceedings. This early victory set the tone for what followed. At every turn, we were prepared, transparent, and procedurally impeccable, while Rebecca and her counsel seemed perpetually on the defensive, reacting rather than strategizing. The true turning point came during Rebecca's deposition in late March. Depositions are sworn testimony given outside of court, but carrying the same legal weight as courtroom testimony. Martin had prepared meticulously for this critical opportunity, creating a carefully structured sequence of questions designed to lead Rebecca into a trap of her own making. The deposition began with standard questions about the marriage, the separation, and Rebecca's current circumstances. Meyer had clearly coached her well. She was composed, somewhat contrite about the affair, but firm in her position that she deserved an equal division of marital assets given her contributions to my career and our household. After establishing this foundation, Martin shifted gears with practiced casualness. "Mrs. Carson, have you ever created or altered financial documents related to your husband's employment or personal finances?" Meyer immediately objected, but in a deposition, the witness still needs to answer unless instructed not to buy their counsel. Meyer, not knowing what evidence we might have, allowed Rebecca to respond after a brief consultation. "No, of course not," Rebecca replied with convincing indignation. "Why would I do that?" Martin nodded as if accepting her answer, then presented her with the first document from a thick folder, a printout of an email she had sent to Jason discussing the fabricated evidence of embezzlement. "Could you please read the highlighted portion of this email, which was sent from your personal account to Jason Whitfield on August 3rd of last year?" Martin requested. The color drained from Rebecca's face as she scanned the document. Meyer leaned forward, clearly seeing this evidence for the first time. I don't recall this email," Rebecca stammered. "Please just read the highlighted portion." "For the record," Martin insisted gently. After a tense pause, Rebecca read, "The financial documents are ready. They should be convincing enough to at least trigger an investigation, which is all we need to pressure him into a favorable settlement." Over the next 2 hours, Martin methodically presented the evidence I had gathered, the fabricated bank statements found on her laptop, the forged emails designed to implicate me in corporate theft, the detailed notes in her handwriting outlining the strategy to threaten me with criminal charges unless I agreed to her divorce terms. Meyer called for multiple breaks, clearly attempting to develop some strategy to counter this unexpected onslaught of damning evidence. By the end of the deposition, Rebecca was visibly shaken. Her earlier composure completely evaporated. The final blow came when Martin presented a report from a forensic accountant analyzing the metadata of the falsified documents, proving they had been created and modified on Rebecca's laptop during times when she claimed to be working late at the office, the very same times our home security system showed her and Jason entering our house. "Mrs. Carson," Martin asked as the deposition concluded, "are you aware that preparing falsified evidence for use in judicial proceedings, attempting to frame someone for a crime they didn't commit, and conspiracy to commit fraud are all criminal offenses in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?" Meyer immediately ended the deposition, but the damage was done. Within days, he contacted Martin to discuss settlement terms. The negotiations were brief and decidedly one-sided. In exchange for not pursuing criminal charges against Rebecca for the attempted framing, something I had never actually intended to do, as it would prolong an already painful chapter of my life, she agreed to a settlement that granted me full ownership of our house, with me assuming the remaining mortgage, my entire retirement accounts without any division, all of my personal property and investments, a clean break with no alimony in either direction. Rebecca received her personal property and clothing her own retirement account, significantly smaller than mine. Her personal vehicle, though she would assume the remaining loan, a one-time payment of $50,000 to help her restart her life given that our marital assets totaled well over $1.2 million. This represented an overwhelming victory. Under normal circumstances in Massachusetts, she would likely have received close to half of everything, regardless of the affair. The attempted framing, however, had completely undercut her position. The settlement agreement included a confidentiality clause preventing either party from discussing the terms or the evidence that led to them, a provision Rebecca insisted upon to protect what remained of her reputation and future employability. That on April 30th, almost exactly 9 months after discovering Rebecca's affair, we appeared before Judge Eleanor Harmon for the final divorce hearing. The proceeding was mercifully brief. The judge reviewed the settlement agreement, confirmed that both parties understood its terms and were entering into it voluntarily, and granted the divorce. The court finds that the marriage between Daniel Carson and Rebecca Carson has irretrievably broken down and hereby dissolves said marriage, Judge Harmon declared, her gavel punctuating the end of 15 years together. Rebecca avoided my gaze throughout the proceeding and left the courtroom immediately after it concluded, Meyer trailing behind her with an expression that suggested he was as eager as his client to put this case behind him. As for Jason, his legal defeat was equally complete. Elaine had hired Catherine Brennan, one of Boston's most formidable divorce attorneys and, coincidentally, a close professional friend of Martin's. The two attorneys had coordinated their strategies to some degree, sharing non-privileged information that benefited both cases. That Jason's divorce was finalized 2 weeks before mine. Under Massachusetts law, his decade-plus marriage to Elaine entitled her to substantial support. The final judgment awarded her their primary residence, 60% of their combined retirement savings, and 5 years of alimony. Jason was left with his personal property, 40% of the retirement funds, much of which went to legal fees, and the obligation to vacate their home within 30 days. Both Rebecca and Jason had gambled everything on their plan to discard their spouses and build a new life together on the ruins of their marriages. Both had lost everything instead. It's been 2 years since that final court appearance, and sometimes it feels like I'm looking back on someone else's life rather than my own. The pain hasn't disappeared entirely. Betrayal of that magnitude leaves scars that may never fully heal, but it has transformed into something more manageable, more distant. Like viewing a storm from the safety of solid ground rather than being caught in its fury. That I still live in our, now my, colonial on Maple Avenue, though it's changed considerably. In the weeks following the divorce, I systematically removed every trace of Rebecca, repainting walls, replacing furniture, rearranging rooms to create new spatial dynamics that didn't trigger memories. The kitchen, which we had renovated just before the affair came to light, was the most difficult space to reclaim. For months, I ordered takeout rather than cook there, the granite countertops she had insisted on serving as unwelcome reminders of our shared past. Eventually, I reclaimed that space too, taking cooking classes and gradually transforming the kitchen into a place of creativity and nourishment rather than a monument to betrayal. Now I host occasional dinner parties for a carefully curated group of friends, some from before the divorce who stood by me, others new connections I've made in this chapter of my life. Professionally, things have flourished beyond my expectations. 6 months after the divorce, I was promoted to Director of Security Architecture at MedTech, with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. The irony isn't lost on me. The very skills that helped me document and counter Rebecca's betrayal proved invaluable in advancing my career in data security. Last year, I finally took that trip to Japan I'd always wanted to experience. Rebecca had never been interested, claiming it was too far and too foreign for her tastes. I spent 3 weeks exploring Tokyo, Kyoto, and the Japanese countryside, taking thousands of photographs and filling a journal with observations and reflections. It was during this trip, sitting in a peaceful Zen garden in Kamakura, that I finally felt the last tendrils of anger release their grip on my heart. Dating has been a more complicated territory to navigate. For the first year after the divorce, I avoided romantic entanglements entirely, focusing instead on rebuilding my life and processing the trauma of Rebecca's betrayal. When I finally did begin dating again, I approached relationships with a caution that sometimes felt excessive, but was probably necessary. 6 months ago, I met Alexandra, a pediatric surgeon who recently moved to Boston from Chicago. Our relationship is still new, still tentative in many ways, but it has helped me remember that connection and vulnerability, while risky, are still worth pursuing. Alexandra knows the broad outlines of my marriage's end, though I've spared her the more painful details. We all have histories, she told me on our third date. What matters is how we carry them forward. As for Rebecca and Jason, their stories took turns that contain elements of both justice and tragedy. Their relationship didn't survive the fallout of our divorces, a fact that brings me no particular pleasure but does confirm what I had suspected all along. Their connection was built on excitement and opportunity rather than genuine compatibility or respect. Rebecca struggled professionally for over a year. The circumstances of her termination from Apex created a black mark on her resume that proved difficult to overcome, particularly within Boston's close-knit PR community. Eventually, through a connection from her college days, she secured a position at a small marketing firm in Philadelphia, a significant step down in prestige and compensation from her previous role. But at least a path forward. I know this because she emailed me about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, ostensibly to tie up some loose ends regarding mail that was still being delivered to the house in her name. The message evolved into a lengthy, emotional reflection on what had happened between us. I don't expect forgiveness, she wrote. What I did was unforgivable on multiple levels. But I want you to know that I understand now the depth of pain I caused, and I live with that awareness every day. The person I was then, calculating, selfish, willing to destroy someone who had been nothing but good to me, that's not who I want to be. I'm working on myself, trying to understand how I became that person and how to never be her again. I responded briefly and neutrally, wishing her well in her journey, but making it clear that we had no reason for further communication. Some bridges, once burned, cannot and should not be rebuilt. That Jason's post-divorce life followed an even steeper downward trajectory. According to Elaine, with whom I still exchange occasional messages, he struggled with both financial and emotional fallout from the divorce. The alimony payments strained his resources, especially after he was asked to resign from Apex's New York office. When the full story of his Boston misconduct came to light, he eventually relocated to Chicago, accepting a position with a much smaller firm at considerably reduced compensation. His relationship with his adult children remained strained, with both refusing to speak to him for over a year. More recently, Elaine mentioned that his daughter has begun tentative steps toward reconciliation, though his son remains estranged. There are moments when I reflect on the devastation wrought in all our lives and wonder if there could have been another way, a path with less collateral damage, less pain for everyone involved. But those thoughts lead nowhere productive. Rebecca and Jason made their choices with full awareness of potential consequences. That those consequences proved more severe than they anticipated doesn't change the fundamental responsibility they bear for their actions. As for me, I've learned lessons I never wanted to learn about trust, betrayal, and resilience. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and vulnerabilities I hadn't acknowledged. I've learned that while forgiveness might be theoretically admirable, it isn't always possible or even appropriate. Sometimes the healthiest response to profound betrayal is not forgiveness, but rather a clear-eyed acceptance of what happened, followed by the decision to build something new from the wreckage. Would I have chosen this path? Never. But having been forced to walk it, I've tried to do so with dignity and integrity. The man who emerged from that storm is more cautious, perhaps, but also more authentic. more attuned to his own needs and boundaries, more appreciative of genuine connection when it appears. Some people say the best revenge is living well. There's truth in that, certainly. But I've come to believe that true justice involves something more nuanced than revenge. It's about natural consequences flowing from actions, about truth prevailing over deception, about the restoration of moral order in a situation where it has been violently disrupted. Be why that measure, justice was indeed served. Rebecca and Jason's elaborate plot to secure happiness at the expense of others' destruction collapsed under the weight of its own moral bankruptcy. My life, after a period of darkness, has emerged into new light. Not unchanged, how could it be, but whole? Perhaps even stronger at the broken places. That if there's a lesson in this for others, perhaps it's this. Betrayal of this magnitude is devastating, but it need not be defining. With patience, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to truth, rather than vengeance, it's possible to not only survive such betrayal, but to ensure that justice, real justice, not mere revenge, ultimately prevails. And in that justice, paradoxically, lies the foundation for genuine healing and the possibility of a new beginning. That if you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.